So, welcome to another episode of the Curious Midlife podcast. And I'm very excited today because I have a very multi-passionate, curious midlife woman who wears many hats. And I mean, I'm sure this isn't the full list, but is a qualified attorney, is a business owner, is a world champion athlete, and is an author. So I present and introduce to you, and I'm very grateful for your time here today, the wonderful Juliet Starrett. So Juliet, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Can't wait to chat you up.
It's going to be good. So you have all of these things. You have all of these bows and arrows and many hats as being very multi-passionate. So what hats are you wearing most of the time right now?
That's a great question. Right now we just launched our book, Built to Move, in April. And so I would say one of the biggest hats I'm wearing right now is being an author and promoting our book, Built to Move. I'm spending a lot of time talking about our book, making sure it gets out into the world. So that's what I've been spending. I would say the last 6 months, that's probably 50% of my time is, 50. And then maybe more recently, like 75% of my time has been promoting our book, managing all the logistics around marketing and a book launch and sort of the big picture things that it takes to actually get a book out into the world, which is complicated and not easy. And, then the rest of my work time, I'm spending, continuing to be the CEO and leader of our business, The Ready State, and make sure the wheels keep turning there so that, our business stays alive while we focus our attention on writing and promoting this book. So I think that right now, those are my big two focuses.
Yeah. And I know that, I mean, when people think about books, they always think, oh, it's really hard to write a book. And what I always say to people, it's really hard to finish a book and then to do all the other book stuff that looks invisible to everybody else, because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And thank you for saying that. The writing part is certainly has its challenges and it's time consuming. Our book Built to Move actually sort of began 5 years ago. And there was sort of a 3-year period of thinking about writing it, thinking about what it would involve. And then, a 2-year period of actually writing it. But in many ways, I found that process to be, the most joyful because it was because we consider this book to be the culmination of so many years of experience in the health and fitness space. And so we really actually enjoyed that process a lot. It was slow going, but it was also behind the scenes. But I will say, Mike, what I will say that is very invisible is marketing a book is challenging and very time consuming. And I think it's, just like you said, it really is something that's invisible to people. Books just appear and we enjoy them or don't enjoy them. But I think what's so difficult about it is it's a crowded space. I don't know how many books are published every year, but a lot, especially now that it's easier to self-publish books through, Amazon and other outlets. It's a lot easier to self-publish a book. And so there's just a lot out there, and there's and not just from a book standpoint, but I'm sure, as you know, the amount of content there is out there for people to consume in the form of podcasts, social media, books. And so the goal with marketing a book like this is, how do we stop the scroll? How do we get people to care? How do we stand out in a crowded market? And so that part of it is, to me, the most difficult and also challenging because it's not as natural for us. We obviously have done a lot of marketing over the years because we've written other books and have a business, but we didn't start off as marketers, and it's not something that we always feel comfortable doing. Kelly and I always joke around and say that we would be like the greatest, richest entrepreneurs on earth if we could run a whole business where we make money by just giving away things for free.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'd be the best, like we'd be rich. But turns out, you have to actually make money when you run a business. So I think it's, and by the same token though, while it is difficult, it's also, I would say, since the book has been out just a bit over a month, it's been really fun because something that when you're writing a book, you care about it and you're passionate about it and it's important to you, but you don't really know whether it's going to land or whether anyone else is going to care or find it interesting. So I would say that this period now, the book's been out almost 6 weeks, has been really fun because the book has gotten out into the world and really seems to be resonating with people and is making a difference and helping them feel better and take a new perspective on their health. And so I think that part of it has also been really very fun and just a wonderful experience and time as well. So it's a mix. It's the up and down.
Yeah. And I know that moment of like, does anyone care?
Right.
I did all this stuff and I really care, but does anyone else care?
Right.
But I'd like to, and you kind of half answered the next question. I wanted to just kind of rewind a little bit. And can you give my listeners a little bit of insight in case they're not aware of who you are in these kind of movement spaces? And so kind of like the genesis of, what got you to this project, and quick resume from the last couple of decades of like how that journey, because for me, you're very uniquely situated in two very different camps. There's one camp which is you're a really busy professional woman with two kids, loads of responsibilities, you're a high performer, and then you also have this, like, you've had a very unique insight into elite fitness that most of us just like, we guess what happens over there, but you walk both worlds. So can you share a little bit of your story, and then really what came to the genesis of the book that you've created?
Sure. And I think, if I could encapsulate the last, I would say 25 or 30 years of my professional life, it would be taking a lot of right turns professionally. And in many ways, those right turns seem disconnected, but I think for me, they really are part of this whole career arc that does make sense to me. But I'm going to go way back into high school to start this, but I'll be fast. So, bear with me.
Take your time.
But I started off as a crew. I was a rower in high school. I was on the crew team in high school. And then I went on to be a Division I rower at Berkeley, where I went to college. And so I had some really early and really intense athletic experience as a rower. And, anyone who knows anything about rowing knows that the rowers are like, and maybe rowers would be against this, but we're sort of like athletic rejects in some ways. A lot of rowers fall into rowing because maybe they weren't the most coordinated or agile or fast, maybe weren't the best at like a ball sport, but they had this other athletic ability, which is, the ability to work together as a team, the ability to suffer. The suffering is a big part of rowing. And so I think it's also just the coordination amongst the team, is really interesting. And this weird sort of mix of technique and creativity that has to go together to make a boat move fast. So I think it takes a certain personality type who fall into this, and maybe many people who didn't find themselves succeeding in other sports. And then I think one of the most influential decisions I ever made in my life is I was a freshman in college and I needed a summer job. And I had worked the prior summer as a hostess as a restaurant and knew immediately, maybe on my third day of work, that the restaurant business was not for me. I don't know what it was, but I didn't care for it. And I was like, I do not want to spend another minute in a restaurant. So I was sort of scouring the universe for what kind of summer job I could have in college. And keep in mind, at this point, I'm like 18 years old. So just put yourself in.
Oh, we know everything then.
We know everything.
We know everything.
And my motivations were, I want to be tan. I would like to work outside. And ideally, if there were some men or boys involved that were cute looking, that would also be great. So, this is my 18-year-old calculus. And I landed upon, because I had a friend who had similar interests, we decided we're going to go to river rafting guide school over spring break. So we go to guide school, and I just fall in love with being a river rafting guide, a guide. And I do this every summer in college, and I find this amazing amount of community. And then from there, because I had this mixed experience as a Division I rower and a river guide, right after I graduated from college, I became aware that this whitewater paddling was actually a professional sport that people did. I wasn't even aware of it. And I was invited to go try out for the U.S. Women's Extreme Whitewater team. And I, again, didn't even really know what this was. But I was like, okay, cool. I'm 23, 24, and I'm, sort of figuring out who I am and what I'm doing, and I've got time, and I know I love being outside and being on the river. I know I can suffer. I've got this skill set. Let's go see what happens. I show up at the tryouts. There's 60 other women trying out for one more spot on the team. And so again, I have low expectations. I don't really even know what I'm getting into, go through a whole series of tryouts and end up making the team. And so I am all of a sudden now on the national team of a sport that I don't really even know what it is. And, I'm 23, 24 years old. I've just graduated from college. But what I do know is that I love adventure. I love being on the river, and I love to travel. And I could see that this was going to be a way where I could travel and someone else would pay for it as well.
Perfect.
So I found myself at my first world championship event almost 6 months later, trained with the team, and ended up winning a world championship, which also was a shock to me because, again, I was very new to the sport. And so I continued on with this professional athlete path for 5 years, competed in 5 world championships, won 5 national championships in order to qualify. And for the people who don't know anything about whitewater paddling in the US in particular, it's an extremely fringe sport. I mean, nobody, including me, even knew what it was and knew that it was a competitive thing. But it turns out in other countries, it's actually very competitive, and that there's, teams that are supported by their governments. There's been a lot of consideration of having it be an exhibition sport at the Olympics. So in other countries besides the US, it's like really a thing. And so we would show up at these races, and it was, teams from all over the world, from 60 or 70 countries. So just the experience of being an athlete was amazing. I got to travel to Africa and South America and Central America and Europe and, all over. So I had this grand old time being a professional athlete. But I will tell you, and for those who don't know, it's nearly impossible to support yourself as a professional athlete. This is universal. Obviously, there's always a few who can and a few who can't. But, I was working a lot of odd jobs and worked as a substitute teacher. And I mean, you name it, I did odd jobs on the side to sort of support this passion I had of being a professional athlete and being out on rivers and, trying my luck at these world championship events. And so at some point I was like, okay, I'm going to law school. I'm tired of being chronically broke and I need to make money. And I actually had thought in college I would go to law school, but I had put that off. So I just made good on this sort of promise I had to myself. Like, this is what every smart kid does. You go to law school. Like, if you're smart and kind of good at school, you just go to law school. So I went to law school, graduated, got a big firm, law firm job, big fancy firm, and worked for about 7 years at a big law firm. But during that time, Kelly and I we had our first child. We were still training. We loved to train, we loved exercise. I'd been an athlete, been a professional athlete. Kelly also had been, we actually met at the Whitewater World Championships in 2000, my husband. So we shared a lot of similar interests, but we felt like we were in this sort of dark period of our lives in terms of our physical selves, because we, both retired as athletes. We'd both gone to graduate school, had full-time jobs. And what we were doing was going to like a traditional gym, like you can think about in the 2000s, right? Like my workout would be like Stairmaster and then like curls or something, right? Like it was a very 2000s. And while I was doing it because I knew it was important to exercise, I wanted to stay fit, I was totally not inspired. And during that time, Kelly actually found CrossFit in 2003 or 2004. He found a website, very early CrossFit. We fell in love with that style of training. And so we decided to open a CrossFit gym in San Francisco. And we were the 21st CrossFit gym to open. And we knew we were part of something big and emergent. And we really fell in love with it because while we thought we were amazing athletes, what we discovered as we started actually doing CrossFit is we had giant holes in our physical capabilities. We weren't strong, we weren't fast, we weren't agile. We had a lot of challenges. And so, but all of the difficulty we had in CrossFit made it fun because we were like totally challenged on a daily basis. And, we were learning something new. There were so many new skills involved, gymnastics and Olympic lifting. And, you name it in CrossFit, it shows up at some point. And so we found it really interesting and really turned on by this idea, but we really didn't start it to be a business at all. We opened our CrossFit because we were like, hey, we're doing this. We have some friends of ours joining us in the backyard to do it. This is fun. Let's do this. We both had other jobs. Let's try this. And it turned out we were really on the front end of this massive wave of, CrossFit. And I will say, even probably some people listening to this, people have very strong feelings about CrossFit. They either love it or hate it. But what I can say, regardless of that, is that CrossFit really changed fitness as we know it. I mean, it was instrumental in changing fitness. I mean, until CrossFit came around, there were yoga studios and Globo gyms. And that was kind of your choice. Like you could go to yoga, or you could go to a Globo gym, or you could take fitness classes or lift weights or whatever. But they really changed the fitness market and opened the door to boutique fitness and all the options we have today. And fitness just looks so different. So we knew we were on an emergent trend. And then fast forward a few years, my husband, I'm still practicing law. We're running a CrossFit gym on the side. We're raising 2 babies at this point. I'm working full-time as a lawyer. My husband left his full-time physical therapy practice to run the gym and bring his physical therapy practice inside our gym. And that's when we started a bit consulting with professional athletes. We were early in this CrossFit. We started working with some serious athletes at our gym, word spread, but we started our second company originally called MobilityWOD, because my husband was seeing physical therapy clients in our gym. And what he started realizing is that people were coming to him on a day-to-day basis, paying out of pocket for physical, maybe paying $150 or $200, taking a few hours off of work, spending time trying to take care of their bodies. And what he realized is that people had no tools to be able to take care of themselves on their own. And that in most cases, the clients coming to see him didn't actually really need a physical therapist. What they needed was to better understand how their body worked and be given a few tools to be able to take care of their own body, often on the gym floor or on the living room floor while they're watching TV at night. So that was where our second company, MobilityWOD, started. And once MobilityWOD started, and I had a foot in my law practice and now 2 feet out running 2 businesses, I realized that I'm not a superhuman. I wasn't busy raising 2 babies. I realized that it was time. We realized there was something to this, and I left my law practice and went in 2009 full-time to run both of the businesses as CEO. So ran 2 businesses. For a while, we actually closed our gym, San Francisco CrossFit, during the pandemic. That's a whole other conversation, which we can get to. And then in 2018 or 19, we rebranded our company MobilityWOD to the Ready State. But what the Ready State does is we teach people, often weekend warriors or people who care about wanting to be able to use their body and keep that sort of physical hallway open wide. We teach people how to understand how their body works, do some basic maintenance on their body so they can keep doing the things that they love. And we do that through a variety of videos and products and, different sort of online services. So I've been running those businesses. And then simultaneously, over all these years, we've been consulting with professional teams, professional athletes, in helping them figure out how to get better at what they do. And it turns out that in athletics now, maybe this was true in the 90s when I was an athlete, but you can't really outwork anybody anymore. That's over. Like everybody's working hard. So all teams, professional athletes, organizations are trying to figure out how to get better on the margins. And what that means is, how do you recover better from the work you did do? How do you make sure to take care of your body? How do you avoid injury as much as possible? How do you make sure your athletes are getting enough sleep and food and nutrition, right? So that's where the work has really been done for us over the last 10 or 15 years, is not on how can we consult with coaches about how to make their athletes better at their sport. That's what those professional coaches are good at. What we're good at is, okay, you can't work harder, but what we can help you do is figure out how to take care of your body and sort of like manage this carcass that is going to get you through life. And so I think you put it beautifully at the beginning of this question, which is what we've done now with our work, and the way we're really trying to think about our work is, how do we take all these lessons we've learned from working with high performing athletes and apply them to everyday people? And that's really been what we've shifted into caring more about now, especially, you obviously use the word midlife. I just turned 50 2 weeks ago. So I am decidedly in midlife. So that's what I care more about now. I still, working with athletes and teams is sexy and fun and it's cool. But really what I care about now as a 50-year-old midlife woman who's been in the health and fitness space now for almost 20 years is, how do we take those lessons we've learned at the highest levels and actually cast a wide net and share them with more people?
Absolutely. And I think what you guys have done really beautifully is, and I love also that your whole story is kind of like, well, there was no plan, and then the plan became another plan, but there was never a plan.
Yeah,
there was never a plan.
We describe ourselves as accidental entrepreneurs for sure. So yes.
I love, I think anyone who has that kind of creative curiosity is just like, well, everything kind of connects, and it all just felt right for me, so I did that. because a lot of times people want to identify us as, well, you're a movement coach. So, well, why, what do you mean you're a filmmaker as well? Or what do you mean you're an attorney and you're a world champion athlete and now you're an author? It's like, well, it's all, for me, this is, just the return of kind of like Renaissance woman and Renaissance man. And we should be versed. And there is a natural connectedness between the arts, the science, the physical, the intellectual, the emotional. We are, biopsychosocial beings. But what
I could not agree more.
Cool. And I love that it's almost like there were these knowledge gaps. There were knowledge gaps when, CrossFit, what I saw is this, that so many women suddenly started lifting. So many women were now like, oh, I want gymnastics rings. And having things that really celebrated the capacity and potential for really strong female bodies, which is just beautiful. And then the extension of that is, well, I want movement for life. Like what we're training for at 20 in a competitive framework, maybe that motivation and those strategies aren't going to necessarily age well, but we're always going to want to be moving well. So where's the knowledge gap around that? So what are the key things? So the book is, I love it. It's really kind of like, I believe it's really of its time. And I had a very maverick entry into, I had no fitness background, creative industries background, found myself watching movers, like really elite movers, the parkour pioneers who would run, jump, climb, crawl, lift. And they were so resilient. You could just throw anything at them. The only time, and I think as a water person, you'll appreciate this, the only time I've ever been able to do things when some of the people I was around who were incredible athletes was we were on a shoot in Nicaragua and we had a day rest and I was like, let's go surfing. And they were all like, yay. And just because I'd done it before, I could surf better than them. And it was like, yes. My one joy, my glory moment. But these tradition, I feel like sport and fitness has moved away from the happy generalist who could do all these things rather than kind of to specialize. So I just think it's wonderful that this book is out and it touches so many passions that I'm really clued into, but I'd rather hear about them from you. So what is an overview of the book? Because you talk about vital signs and you talk about base camp. So can you share some of that?
Sure. And just really quick, two things I thought of as you were leading up to that question. One of the greatest joys I had as a woman owning a CrossFit gym for many years was that, one of the things that women, I think before CrossFit didn't think they could ever do is a pull-up. Pull up for a lot of women seems extreme. But,
it's the Holy Grail.
It's the Holy Grail. But if you go to CrossFit, every woman can get at least one pull-up. And I know from experience from owning a CrossFit gym for almost 17 years that it doesn't matter what shape or size or physical ability that, women would come in the door, they could get a pull-up, like universally. But one of my greatest joys as a CrossFit gym owner would actually watch new male members come into a class and where pull-ups were programmed. And then have them see women get on the pull-up bar and not just do a pull-up, but do many pull-ups. And then they realize they've come in the door and can't do one. And you could see it. I saw this expression on hundreds of male faces coming in there. So that was a great joy for me as a woman. So I'm sorry for the aside, but
I think it's, I'm just going to aside again, because I think it's so important because it's easier to be it once we see it.
Yeah.
And we're providing these new examples and role models. And it's that thing of, it's not just one genetic freak.
Yep.
It's like, there are all these women. Oh, and by the way, they're not climbers. And by the way, they're not all 20 years old. And by the way,
they're not all skinny and they're not all right. Exactly. They're not all muscular and skinny. And you're exactly right. It's just a total mind shift. Yeah. It's amazing. So, all right, let me answer your question about vital signs and just the book generally. I mean, I think you also, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on what you said earlier about sort of how this book came to be. I mean, I think you really picked up on exactly what it was, in my professional life, my husband and I have worked with, all of these athletes of all stripes, from, CrossFitters to Olympians to, people in the NBA, and you name it. And so we've been able to really see what those teams are working on and what's working. And we've been able to experiment with what advice we give and what works and doesn't work. But simultaneously, you're exactly right. Like, I'm actually, a busy working mom. That's what I do. I live in the suburbs amongst a bunch of other busy working moms. Those people are my friends. Some of them are health and fitness enthusiasts, but a lot of them aren't. But what they all share is they want to be healthy and feel good in their bodies. So, I want to like spend my weekend talking about these topics. And, that's what Kelly and I talk about at the dinner table. But most of my friends don't care, but they do care about being healthy and feeling good in their bodies. And what I saw, because Kelly and I are sort of the go-to people in our community for health and fitness advice, is what I saw is people approached us and we're so confused. What diet should I follow? Should I be paleo, keto, intermittent fasting? What form of exercise should I do, and how much and when? And well, I don't really like to exercise. So what do I do then? And so what we saw was, hey, we're hanging out with a cohort of people who want to feel good now, and they want to feel good as they age, but they aren't being spoken to well by the fitness business. We're not really meeting them where they are. We're not relating to their concerns. I mean, if you follow a lot of, big health and fitness people on Instagram, you'd think that they spend their days, doing a 3-hour morning routine of gratitude, journaling, meditating, ice bathing, sauning.
Bullshit.
Yeah. And then they work out for 3 hours and then spend 3 more hours meal prepping. It's like, if you say that to like a busy working mom, she's going to punch you in the face. I mean, excuse my, but I mean, it would bug me too. I was like, I would see all this, even, I'm like, I'm in this business, but what I do is I wake up in the morning, and if I'm lucky, I can like hammer a coffee before I'm getting my kids ready for school and making lunch and breakfast and harried. And like, then again, I'm lucky if I can throw together some kind of breakfast in a Tupperware and get to work. So I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm seeing these messages online, and that's the business I'm in. And they're not only not speaking to me, but they're definitely not speaking to the people in my broader community, and definitely aren't relatable and often not scalable and, confusing. I mean, you name it. So it's like, I had these two experiences of working with all these high performers, being able to really break down like what's going to work and make people better and faster and stronger. And then simultaneously being like an everyday mom, driving my kids in the drop-off lane to school and trying to make it all work, and working in front of a computer most of my days. And so, and then on top of that, I took this great 1.5 year long course with a company called Precision Nutrition, John Berardi. I did his nutrition certifications because I'm kind of like a nutrition nerd and have always sort of cared about that piece of it. And what I loved about that class is that it actually had nothing to do with nutrition. I learned this in like the first 3 weeks I took the course. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I've signed up for this short course and then a 1 year-long course. It had nothing to do with nutrition. I mean, basically the nutrition principles were like the basics, the fundamentals, which we all know to be true. And then the whole entire course was, how do you get people to make behavior change? And so I think it was sort of those 3 things, right? Like, I'm working professional athletes. I really see that when it comes to anything related to health and fitness, the principles are very standard. Nobody really disagrees on them when push comes to shove. It's how do you get people to do things differently? And then also sort of my perspective of, I'm a time crunch mom and I don't have a lot of time. If I'm lucky, I have an hour a day to work out. And so what we felt like was missing is that we'd written some other books, highly technical. We felt like we were sort of missing the book that we could hand to our neighbor who comes and says, hey, you guys, like, I can't ride my bike because I have back pain. Or, hey guys, what diet should I follow? Or, hey guys, like, I'm starting to get older and feel my body's getting stiffer. I'm having some aches and pains. What should I do? Like, we wanted to create this manual, but really something that was very accessible and relatable to normal people. And so we worked really hard on sort of the tone and the language and the vibe. And we included a lot of stories about like things that do and don't work for us. But ultimately, what we realized was missing in this book health and fitness space was any objective measures. What we saw in the pandemic is that people started, like, regular everyday people were like tracking their SaO2 and tracking like all these other vital signs. And we're like, wait, you're just like, advertising dad across the street and you're telling me about your SaO2 tracking, to see if you get COVID or not. And So what we realized is we're like, okay, people are comfortable tracking vital signs. We're familiar with the term vital signs because we get some when we go to the doctors once a year, like our blood pressure. Everybody knows 120/80. It's like fine blood pressure. It's not great. It's not bad, but it's a piece of information from which you can make decisions or not. So we realized like, okay, people are comfortable with this idea of vital signs, but why don't we have any physical vital signs? Why hasn't someone said, okay, objectively, this is what your hips should be able to do. This is what your shoulders should be able to do. This is how many vegetables you need to eat. This is how much sleep you need to get. Just these objective measures that you could turn to, almost like giving yourself a physical in your own house a couple times a year, and something that you can just keep an eye on. Because I think one of the things I see, especially now as I am 50, is if I think about my health as like a wide corridor, like a wide, giant, wide hallway, I want that hallway to stay as wide as possible. And what I don't want, and what we all start to see as we age, is that people's hallways start constricting and constricting and constricting. And I'm thinking to myself, what are the things that I can do to keep my hallway as wide open? And that's where these specific vital signs came to pass. What are the things that we do, Kelly and I actually do on a daily, monthly, weekly basis that we feel like move the levers for us the most from a health standpoint and how we feel? What are the things we know that will help us move into older age and still feel good with a wide hallway? And what are the things we know that the professional athletes we are doing to go faster, be faster, stronger, more agile, run faster, you name it. And all those things boil down to these 10 vital signs.
And I think it's also, I mean, it's wonderful. And you really, I mean, you're preaching to the choir with me, but also it is that everyday thing. And I think there's a great sense of autonomy around this book. There's a great sense of, you really can take responsibility. You don't have to outsource everything. You actually don't need to be in the fancy equipment. You don't need to be in the fancy gym. Like I used to have this idea that unless your boyfriend or your husband or your partner or whoever was in fitness world, like you were never really going to be fit. Like it was a very kind of distant thing if you weren't naturally motivated towards those things. And then also the distinction between health and fitness, because not all fit people are very healthy. And yet that's a discussion that very few of our big fitness influencers want to kind of acknowledge. But if you ask the health coaches, you ask the physios, and it's not all of them, but it's a lot of times like, God, yeah, they're a mess. Like they don't sleep, they don't eat properly. They're not 360 degrees strong. They are very specialized. And so I think that's really important. And I'm going to ask you to kind of go through what those various things are. But I'm also just going to say, first of all, like, I'm really glad you guys did the food thing, because a lot of movement people won't touch the food thing. And yet without the food thing, you don't have the energy thing for the movement thing and the strength thing and the recovery thing. So I was like, yeah, they did the food thing. Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And you did
I
the
have
breathwork
so many,
thing, which is like, for me, that's the movement skill that people aren't training. And you have really beautifully positioned this as like number one, I believe. So guide us through, Juliet, what would be someone's like, how to take your vital signs? What does that include?
So if you think about this, we do have 10 vital signs in this book, and we were very mindful about how we pick them. And I will get to the food thing in a second, because I'm sure we could have a whole entire podcast about that, given that I'm guessing we're similar age. But they're divided in sort of two categories. I would say there are 5 of the vital signs are sort of movement specific vital signs. How can you move and can you access your native range of motion? And most people think they don't care about that, but I'll get to why they do care and should care. And then the other ones I would say are more like lifestyle or behavioral vital signs. And the reason that we want to include both and why we think this book is so different is that, you can go out and get 1,000 books on nutrition and 1,000 books on sleep. And nowadays, lots of books on breathing, and many of them are excellent. But what there isn't is a book that says these are how all of these behaviors are conjoined and connected. and why you should care about those connections. And I love that you brought up the nutrition chapter, because, as we were writing this book, we had a lot of conversations knowing that, this is almost the one we had to be the most careful about, because
it's not highly emotive at all.
Oh my God.
Food.
It's, food is people's identity and,
Oh,
whatever, but we really wanted to include that chapter in particular for the reasons you said, because again, when we're consulting with professional athletes and high performers, we see how essential having, the right nutrients on board are for things like athletic performance, but also for things like work performance, being able to think and being able to recover from the workouts you do and be ready to do the next ones. And, just overall longevity and tissue health. I mean, there's so many reasons why this eating chapter is so important to us. And we talked a lot about like, oh man, okay, like if we're going to get slaughtered on the internet, like this is the chapter, because people are so connected to their eating approach. But I think I'm really proud of what we were able to do in this chapter, because I think we were able to make the case that, if you want to have healthy tissues and age gracefully and feel good in your bodies and be able to think clearly and be creative and, recover from injury and surgery, like this nutrition piece is really clutch. And one of my other big influences in nutrition, in addition to John Berardi and many others, well, there's two, but one of them is a woman, Kate Shanahan, who wrote a book called Deep Nutrition. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but she went around the world and studied food culture dating back to the beginning of humans. And turns out that there are basically 4 things that everybody does in every culture dating back into the beginning of time. They eat fermented foods. Now, what fermented foods differ based on what culture? If you're in Korea, it's kimchi. If you're in Germany, it's pickles. I mean, you name it. It's like people are eating fermented food. They're eating meat on the bone. They're eating a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. And, the 4th pillar I'm missing, but those are kind of the main pillars, universal across every culture, across all of human history. These things are things that people are eating. And then, fast forward to 2018, before the pandemic, a dear friend of ours named E.C. Sinkowski created this thing, which it's the way we eat and how we recommend people eat in the book. It's called the 800-gram challenge. And it's based on a study that showed that eating 800 grams of fruits and vegetables is sort of the minimum number to get all the benefit of the fiber, the micronutrients, and all the beauty that is eating, fruits and vegetables in our lives. And what we loved about it is that it was a set number. And that's I'm back to this thing of these objective measurements. People have said for years, yeah, you need to sleep, but well, there's debate about how much. Like Kelly and I say, no, like we're drawing a line and saying you need to sleep this much. Otherwise you're under rested, period. And like no conversation. Nobody's ever said, okay, everybody kind of knows you should eat some fruits and vegetables, but no one's ever said you need to eat this many. And there's actually research to show that eating this many is going to actually be good for your body from a longevity standpoint, a morbidity standpoint. And not only that, just how you feel today in your body. And then simultaneously, we found over the years, both working with athletes and regular people, that, one of the biggest holes in people's diets is they're not eating enough protein, and that those requirements really continue to increase as we age, that it becomes more and more important for us to make sure we have protein on board as our sort of natural muscle loss occurs. But the thing that I wanted to get to, which I'm sure you can relate to, is that I feel that I am like a diet refugee, a diet survivor. And that's one of the reasons why I love this approach to food so much. I mean, let me go back to the beginnings, and maybe you did all of these things I did, but I was a D1 Division I rower at Cal, probably training 30 hours a week in the early 90s when the fat-free diet was all the rage. And I mean, we were doing things like eating red vines because they were healthy because they were fat-free. And I mean, the decisions we made around food when it came to the fat-free diet, especially as an athlete, I look back and I think in horror, I could have been such a better athlete. And then when early CrossFit came around, we were paleo, we were zone, we were Mediterranean diet, and then we were intermittent fasting and keto, and then this. And, so I imagine a lot of listeners, and it sounds like you from your reaction, are also diet refugees. And I think what I've seen in my own experience in this business is that one of the biggest things we've done wrong, and that's many things, but one of the biggest things we've done wrong is demonized a lot of food groups, and especially fruit. I mean, talk about like losing the
I
forest through
mean,
the trees.
the crimes of a banana. I mean, it can't be that
Ah,
bad.
no, like
It's
I
insane.
literally look back. I mean, I myself did not eat a banana for like 10 years. Like I wasn't immune to this. I got caught up in this, like a banana has too much sugar. I mean, I look
Mhm.
back and like scratch my head. So I think we've demonized a lot of foods. Certainly there are celiacs and people who are gluten intolerant in the world, but I mean, there was really probably no reason for people to stop eating gluten for like 20 years. And, there's just a lot of things we've done. And so what I love about what we've done and what I'm really proud of is we've offered people a diet or an approach to eating that for the first time, I think people will experience as expansive
Yeah.
versus restrictive. And especially as women and as a woman that is now, perimenopausal on my way into menopause, I know from my dear friend, Stacey Sims, that the way to really have menopause be a horrible experience is to, do a ton of cardio and massively restrict our calories and massively restrict. Like that's not the way to gracefully get through menopause. So what I love, not only at this age, but, the way that we're eating now feels expansive and not restrictive. We can, the other thing too, I think that is such a, again, I feel sort of mad about all this restricting we did for so many years is that, the way that we commune as humans is around food often.
Mm.
We commune move as humans around movement and food. And so for all these years that I spent doing weird things and restricting my diet and watching my friends bring, a sandwich bag of chicken to a dinner out because they were following X, Y, or Z diet. And I look and I think, man, this is how we commune as families and as friends. And to like take that away because we're following some weird diet is just sort of sad. And then simultaneously, though, I know that diets are people's identities. And what I love again about this approach to eating is it fits into any diet. You can eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables and meet our protein recommendation and still be keto. You can be Mediterranean. You can be paleo. You can be a vegan or a vegetarian. Like Kelly and I are agnostic, like
Yeah.
whatever works for people. Like do that. If that's your identity, like keep doing that. If it's working for you from a body composition standpoint, keep doing that. But just make sure you're meeting your fruits and vegetable minimums. I
Yeah.
really
I
went
love
off
it.
on a tangent there, but I get
No,
very
no,
excited about this food thing.
it's important, and it's been missing. It's been missing from the dialogue. It's been missing from, it's a really nice common sense approach. And I feel like common sense is lacking in a lot of fitness or health or whatever. It all became very, very complicated.
Yep.
And um, the knowledge gap was happening simultaneously and ironically towards a knowledge boom and access to everything, which meant everything had equal value, which meant nothing was, like to filter. And I always like go back and think, well, my great aunt Emily lived to be 100 and she was fine. My
Right.
grandmother lived to be 97
Right,
and
right,
she
right.
was fine. And
Right.
what was it that they were doing? And I remember like when my mum stopped buying butter and we had margarine, and I was just like, this is disgusting. This is really
Yes.
horrible.
Oh
And
yeah, I
she's
was
like,
in
oh, your
that
dad's
phase.
on a
I was with
diet.
you in that phase too. I was with you in that phase too.
And it's like,
Yes.
and my poor dad, like my mum was making me like Rivita with
Yeah.
margarine on. And I was like, that looks like cardboard, Dad. And he was like, yeah, it tastes like it. It
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
like,
Right. I
but
mean, we really just
having all of
lost our
that,
minds, right? For a
it was
while.
insane.
And it turns out that, the basics, the real fundamentals are actually what work.
Yeah.
And, you see a lot of really technical people, who can draw upon every single study ever written, but it turns out the same things that they're recommending are the basics.
Yeah.
We have a good friend who is a former professional CrossFit athlete, Julie Fouché, who runs a company now called Wild Health. It's like a concierge medicine company. Very cool work they're doing. But interestingly, they're able to do genetic testing and a lot of blood work, but ultimately what they're consulting with their clients on largely are these basic habits. Because again, if you want to move the needle on your blood work, or you want to make sure that you're, going to express your genetics the best way you can, turns out the best way to do all those things is to go back to the basics. You've got to eat fruits and vegetables. You need to sleep enough. You got to
Yeah.
move enough. You need to commune with your people. You need to make sure that you get up and down off the ground and practice your range of motion a little bit. I mean, these are the real basics. And so, I think what we really want to do is bring them all together. What are the most important basics you need to do? And, I wanted to just mention you said it was your mom or your aunt or someone who lived to be 99 years old. one of the things we looked at in connection with this book are the blue zones, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's where they have the highest number of centenarians and people with the, the best longevity and lowest morbidity, and there are these little 6 pockets around the world. And you can imagine that those people, including my grandmother and probably your grandparents, were not like getting on their running shoes and going to their CrossFit class and, and then coming home and measuring their food, in the paleo diet where they were eating 3 almonds as a serving. They weren't doing that. What they're doing is moving a lot throughout their day, which we haven't talked about much about, but like making sure that their day is full of movement. They're doing things like walking to the grocery store and carrying some load every so often, just making sure they're in constant movement throughout their days. And then they're doing the basics. They're sleeping enough. They're eating some fruits and vegetables and some protein. They're practicing their balance because they're moving enough and making sure that they're not sedentary all the time. And, those are the things that are helping people live long and live well. And the word that we've really focused on, we actually don't care for the word longevity because Kelly and I could care less if we live to be 105 if we spend the last 15 years in a hospital bed. So we really like the idea of having a durable body. And because to us, durability means that you can, weather the storm. We're all going to face physical difficulties or disease or high periods of high stress or grief. We're all going to have points at which our physical capacity is taxed for one reason or another as humans, as part of the human condition. And what we want to have is a durable body that can, feel good when we're young and weather things like menopause and stress and disease and aging, weather that as well as possible so that our physical hallway stays as wide as possible. And then like hopefully fall off a cliff and die one day. And whether that's at 85 or 105, we don't really care, but what we do care is trying as hard as we can to avoid, a complete and utter loss of independence as we age.
Absolutely. And I've become kind of a parody or like my friends kind of take the mickey out of me in different situations because it's always like, I'm always like, this is what we train for, whether it's like you're in some situation and things don't really go so well. And then you have to adapt and be resilient, whether it's like the car breaks down in the desert, or then it's like, this is what we train for. Or you're going somewhere and you have to like get through a gap somewhere. And I said it to a client this morning, who's, caring for an elderly father. She's had terrible sleep for a few days. She hasn't been training. She hasn't been this. And I was like, your baseline is good. You are so resilient because this is what we train for. Like life's going to throw curveballs. It's going to come at you sideways. It's not going to be linear. And this is a cold start. So like how ready are you? How resilient are you? How adaptive are you? Really, like to use your language, like what are the vital signs of your baseline? Where's your baseline at?
And I'll just interrupt and tell you a quick story about that. So I actually was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2018, and I was very lucky. I caught it extremely early, but I did have a double mastectomy and a reconstruction process and 2 separate surgeries that were 2 weeks back to back. And one of the things, and I, by the way, put it on my list that I wanted to be able to do a pull-up. So I did a pull-up 6 weeks to the day after my second surgery. So that was kind of the thing, like that was my little moment. But, what was so interesting about that process is a lot of people said to me, wow, you heal so quickly. Like you're recovering from these surgeries so quickly. How did you do a pull-up? You must be different. And so the way that people were able to intellectually manage what they saw in terms of my ability to adapt and recover to these 2 major surgeries was that I was somehow different. That they concluded that I had different genetics or that I was special or something.
It's not them. They couldn't possibly do that.
And what I would tell people is I said, actually, no, like I've been training for this. I've been making sure I have muscle mass on my body and sleeping and eating fruits and vegetables. And, I've been creating a resilient body, not just so that I can go mountain biking on the weekends. Yes, partly because I want to mountain bike on the weekends, but also partly because again, life throws curveballs your way. And so I was able to really quickly recover from surgery. But again, the human, like I don't actually have any special powers. I'm not a superhuman. I went into it ready to go. And then I also had the tools. Again, I just went back to the basics. When I got out of my surgeries, I ate a lot of fruits and vegetables. I slept and I moved. I did those basic things. It wasn't rocket science. Even though I have access through my professional life to literally every bell and whistle that comes to recovery and fitness and like, optimizing everything. Like I have access to all that. Right. But that's not what works. I mean, some of those things work and some of those things will help get you from base camp to the top of Everest. But like, I wanted my body to be at base camp and it was, and I was able to I was able to adapt so well and be so resilient in, a time that I think a lot of people were shocked by. And I was like, no, you shouldn't be shocked. Like I've been training for this. Just to go back to what you said to your friends, like I've been training for this.
Excuse me. And yeah, I mean, I didn't know when I read that section of the book, when you shared that journey, it was like, wow. And also to never be able to know, like, well, this is a woman who's, had a double mastectomy and she's gone through breast cancer and she's done this and she's doing life. And, yep. And I think it's all too easy for us to give excuses. And by labeling you special, takes the responsibility off me for doing anything to perhaps prepare myself. And everyone's at a different journey and we all have our stories of where we're at and where we start. So where can people start? Like what is, so it's kind of like, so there's a top 10 within the book. So can you go through a little bit in the time we have left of some of those things?
Yeah. And I think you said it earlier. I mean, I think one of the goals here for us was to empower people to sort of take, again, you can treat it like an at-home physical or just a way to kind of keep an eye on, is to sort of ask yourself, like, is my body durable or not? Let's go. Here's some objective measures. Let's see. And then, if you're not quite, if you're not getting a green in every single test, we give you lots of ways you can think about it and work on it and, reform your environment. So it's easy to make those kinds of decisions. But, I'll just start with one because there's 10 vital signs. Let me go back. Let me actually answer your question about where people would start. I mean, I would say for anyone reading this book, you could read it start to finish. We did sort of think about the order in which to start these tests, but also, I also think it's totally readable as a choose your own adventure. If there's certain things that interest you more than others, if and people listening to this will know if you're one of those people. Actually, Kelly, my husband's one of those people. If like nutrition is something you struggle with, or do you struggle with sleep, or do you feel stiff and sore and are prone to lots of aches and pains? If you fall into that latter category, and just aren't feeling good in your body and have aches and pains, I would start with the more movement specific chapters. If you are more focused on the longevity, if you're focused on longevity, I'd look at all the chapters, but, I think you can definitely do a choose your own adventure approach with this book, but, I'll do one of the movement examples, and I'm sure you tried this test. We opened with a thing called the sit and rise test. Mm-hmm. And it's based on a Brazilian study done in 2017 that people who couldn't get up and down off the floor, or people who could get up and down off the floor without touching a knee or hand to the ground in this sort of crisscross position, which we demonstrate in the book, they live longer. And turns out their mortality was better. And we think the reason for that is connected to this idea that the number one reason people end up in nursing homes is that they fall and can't get up off the ground independently. I think anybody who is awake and listened to the news in the last 10 years have heard the data on, elderly people who fall down tend to die within 2 to 5 years of a fall. But interesting also for young people, the number one reason people go into the ER is for falls. So this isn't just some like maybe someday as a 75-year-old, I'm going to fall down. This is now like people are falling down. And so one of the reasons that we love this test though, is that again, speaking of the empowerment thing, you can try it on your living room floor with your friends and family or alone. There are tons of ways to scale it so that if you're nervous or worried about going down on the floor, you can, try it first to your coffee table, to your couch. There's a lot of ways to scale this test. And what it shows you is, do you have some basic hip range of motion? It actually doesn't require you to express full hip range of motion at all. It's do you have kind of mid-range hip range of motion? And, with this whole mobility range of motion piece, it's hard to get people to care. Right. But, one of the reasons you should care is that you don't want to fall down and not be able to get up when you're older. But also having hip range of motion is so connected to the physical things we all want to do now, regardless of whether we're 25 or 45 or like me, 50 or 60. and also is a big contributor to things like low back pain and knee pain. So people don't realize this connection between having sort of fluid hips that do the things that hips are supposed to be able to do, and all of these other downstream things. And on top of that, athletic performance. I mean, if you're 25 listening to this and you just want to be good at cycling, you still need to care about your hip mobility. So regardless of whether you're young or old, we consider hip mobility to be a vital sign. And if you want to keep your, physical corridor open as long as you're alive, or as open as you can, hip mobility is a key part of that. And what we love about this test is the way to get better at it is to, number one, do the thing. You're not going to go do some correlate of the thing. You just need to actually practice getting up and down off the ground. You can get better. It's kind of like, the women coming into CrossFit, not thinking they could ever do a pull-up and doing a pull-up. Like, you may first do this test and be like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do this test and pass. That's not true. We've seen people who are very stiff and really struggle and practice. So you can get better at it. And the way you get better at it is, number one, getting up and down off the floor more often. And number two, sitting on the floor. And it's going to be doing something that you're already doing. Americans spend 3 hours a day watching TV. So the I don't have time thing is not a good excuse. You have time. You just do it while you're doing something you're already doing, which is watching TV. And what we find is that when you're sitting on the floor, you naturally move into different positions, mostly because a lot of us don't spend a lot of time sitting on the floor, so we're uncomfortable. But that's actually great. The more that you can try different positions, sit crisscross, sit 90-90, long sit, one leg up, even kneel. All these things are just sort of secret ways to work on your hip mobility, are going to help you get better at the sit and rise test. And more importantly, again, keep that hallway of physical movement wide open so you can keep doing the things you want to do without pain. And, we've got other chapters that are on shoulder mobility and ankle mobility and, other sort of physical aspects of your body. But I think that's the piece, the things people have heard about before are nutrition, sleep, breathing. What they haven't heard is how those things all interconnect in a bigger picture, in a sort of comprehensive way. But I think what'll be really surprising to people are a lot of these physical vital signs, because we just aren't paying attention to them. Even athletes, that we know so many people who are, specialized, just like you said earlier, specialized, and then often don't come to us until they tweak their back. And we're like, okay, well, if you're biking and that's all you ever do, and you're in a C-shaped position all the time, like, hey, no wonder.
I mean, we're use it or lose it. We get very good and very adaptive at certain things. And I mean, I do a lot of groundwork, a lot of ground movement, and sometimes people are like, well, what things should I do? And I'm just like, just mess around on the floor. Like,
yeah, just sit on the floor.
Just be on the floor. Do whatever you want. Just be on the floor.
So many of us are working at home now, thanks to the pandemic. And that's obviously a trend that's not going away. And, none of us ever designed our homes to be home offices, really. So we're just trying to adapt that environment to be an office. And it's like, I see behind you, you have what looks like a sort of high counter, right? So if you look at if I work at home in a day, I would spend some of my time working at that high counter and use it as a standing desk. But then I would spend some of my day sitting on the floor at my coffee table in my living room so that I get a chance to sit on the floor a little bit. I would be constantly changing positions, and floor sitting is so important. And, just one of those ways to kind of rewild our body and, take our body through its full range of motion and sort of keep that physical capacity wide open.
Definitely. And I think there's so many things we could talk about, but we're kind of running out of time. But hearing you say rewild, it's like, yes, let's. So just
like sitting on the floor.
Yeah. But just this idea of going back to the importance, again, that you connect all these things together. So you're not just saying like, go and get good at breath work. Okay, you're good. Or because, there are people who are like, well, it's all about balance. And some people it's all about breath. Or it's all about nutrition. No, it's all about strength. It's all about, you can just magical think your way to something. And it's like, no, it's everything. It's everything. And you want the whole, you can't, if you miss a key ingredient from the pie may not taste so nice. It's going to be okay, but you can have a really amazing pie. And then you can have all the ingredients, and that is going to carry you. And it's these basics. And to hear, I feel like there's been a lot of kind of like fringe kind of, movement communities, and the importance of hearing it from within. Like it's kind of like a very anthropological participant observation project. You were both inside and outside to be able to view what was working, and like, oh, you guys think those people have got it all sorted. You have no idea. No,
No,
they're
they do
missing this.
not.
And you, oh, you thought, Mrs. Jones down the street. Well, actually, like, her up and down from the ground, she sleeps like a baby. She eats really good food. She walks every day. It's like she's actually doing better than that bronze medalist right now, but you would have no idea, because how we view and what we celebrate, I feel is a little bit distorted.
I so agree.
And where could fitness do it better?
I mean, I think that number one, fitness could do a better job of making connections between all those things. Because I think, like you said, it's all connected and you can't have one thing without the other. One quick story I'll say is, if someone comes to see Kelly for low back pain, he's one of the most sought after physical therapists on earth. I think people think that he's going to have some like secret program, like it's going to be magic and he's going to wave his hands and he's going to tell them like the craziest things that he does with these professional athletes. And what he tells people to do is walk more, work on their breathing, and mobilize their hips. I mean, this is really basic stuff. So I think we've overcomplicated it. I think we haven't made the connection between all these behaviors and given people, and then I don't think we've given anybody a comprehensive and objective way to measure these kind of vital signs. And I think we've done a good job of that. And then I think the other thing we've really not done a great job of is help people understand how and where they can fit these behaviors into their busy lives.
Yes.
Because people are busy and they're time crunched and they're tired. And I get it. I mean, I love to finish my day and like fall down on the ground and watch some Netflix. Like I get it. I'm there. I'm right there with you after, cooking dinner and helping with homework and all the things we do as moms. And so I think, we haven't helped people realize that these behaviors can be done as part of a busy time crunch life, that you don't have to add on 27 other hour-long classes to do it, that they can be done in 2-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute increments and thought of as sort of compounding interest. And that those little things done in sort of short, like movement snacks and little opportunities to get in some sort of care and feeding of this carcass that is our body can really make a huge difference overall.
100%. And I was actually, I mean, you cite so many amazing studies and projects, and it was like, oh, the book Sparks in there, and this is that. And one thing that really struck me was the study that showed, and I think it was to do with longevity as well, that people who sprinkle movement throughout the day, their health span or their life trajectory is better than those who would maybe do like 1 hour of
and then
intense
sit for the rest of the day.
And then sit for the rest of the day.
Yeah. And the other interesting piece is they're starting, there's this whole, there's a whole field now called like sedentary research. Like there's people whose sole goal as researchers is to sort of research the effects of our, modern and sedentary lives. But one of the things that they're starting to realize is that really the difference between lifelong weight control is also not really connected to that formal exercise we're doing in 1 hour blocks, but is actually more connected to how much total movement we're getting throughout our day. And that the people who naturally genetically, for whatever reason, are sort of have a stronger desire to move more, really struggle with their weight a lot less in their life. And so I find that to also be a really interesting sort of way of thinking about it, that it's about total movement and not total heroic movement, like not total CrossFit movement, which I love CrossFit, by the way. I still do it to this day, but it's not about that heroic 1 hour of Pelotoning or exercising or Orange Theory or yoga or whatever you're doing. It's about how much total movement you're getting throughout your day.
Absolutely. And I think I want to really, thank you and your co-author, your husband, Kelly Starrett, for the book, because I feel it's a celebration of the walkers, the everyday movers. If you're doing your housework, value that. You're moving.
That counts. Yes.
It's
movement.
It's all there. And as an invitation to get back to the basics, to stop thinking we need to like go down more rabbit holes, because we all know the basics, I think. And I just think it's time to kind of re-celebrate them.
Yep.
And so before we quickly end, what are you doing for fun these days? I just love to ask all the amazing women who are on the podcast. So what does fun look like right now for you?
So I took up mountain biking 4 or 5 years ago, and I created a mountain bike club, which I, by the way, am a huge fan of creating movement clubs of any kind, because we're more likely to do it if we create a club.
And I'm going to interrupt you and just celebrate your standing children project in schools.
Thank you.
That I remember reading about. Was it like 2013? And
yeah.
I was in the middle of my doctorate, and I think I included it as a note
so
about
awesome.
something. So it's like, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So I don't think I'm a great mountain biker, but I love being out there, and I love, I commune with my friends, and it's a community experience. And Kelly and I love to travel. So we're going to Norway this summer with our kids.
Nice.
I have
the fjords.
So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing for fun. Most of the fun things I like to do involve some kind of physical activity. And most of the fun things I do involve eating or physical activity.
I mean, all the people I know who move really well, they eat really well. And so this is a wonderful book. Where can people find it? Where can they find out more about you and everything that they can do to improve their lives?
Thank you so much. The book is available anywhere people buy books. So in-person retailers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So any sort of online retailer. If you want to learn more about the book, you can go to builttomove.com. And also we have something on builttomove.com called the 21-day challenge. It actually is a video companion to a challenge we have at the end of the book, and it's free. Anybody can sign up. It helps a lot if you have the book in hand. You're going to get a lot more out of the challenge if you actually have the book. But it's a 21-day challenge, and it's really designed to sort of bring to life some of the tests and the practices we have in the book, and then give people a framework for how they can fit these behaviors into their everyday lives. So it's all at builttomove.com. And then on the socials, I'm at Juliet Starrett.
Wonderful. Any final messages?
I just thank you so much. So fun to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, a pleasure. And I hope
keep moving. Keep moving, people. That's my final message. Keep moving.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the show. Remember to subscribe and leave a review, and let me know what resonated, what you liked, what it brought up, what you're curious about, and what you would like to hear. You can go to julieangel.com and you will find a bunch of great free resources there. There is the free Move More course, your free Movement Snacks guide, and if you are interested in reclaiming and increasing your physical strength and confidence so you can get your mojo back, be brave, adventurous, and age with grace, then message me via social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, or through my website, or email me at drjulieangel@gmail.com. That's drjulieangel@gmail.com, and let's set up a call. And until the next time, enjoy, stay curious, and I'm glad you enjoyed the show.